to be back with you for another day as we are continuing on in our study of the book. My name is Kevin Young. I have the privilege of being lead clergy at Christ Table. If you would like to know more about Christ Table, that URL that is right up there is the place you need to go, www.christstable.today. Please sign up for the email list. If you've been watching these and you haven't signed up for the email list, please do that so that we can let you know everything that's going on around Christ Table. We have a new study that is coming out here in just a few days, and I want to make sure to put it in your hands, and that's how you can find out about it. Now, if you'd like to know more about this study that we're in right now, in particular, the URL that is right there in front of me, go.christstable.today/the book is going to give you all of the info that you need in order to do that. You can download a list of all of the days of this study and all of the readings that go along with it, or you can download a PDF study guide that goes each and every day through this study with all of the text, all the background information that you need, questions for you to go deeper in, as well as questions for youth and children. And if you would like a printed copy of that, you can get it there at that URL as well, and that helps us keep these on the air whenever you make donations to Christ Table, and so we appreciate that a lot. And this study, though, we're focusing on the book, and that book is the Bible, and we're spending time kind of looking at it through different lenses, specifically the lens of genre. You know, we've looked at different types of writings in the Bible over the last few weeks, and this week we're kind of taking a bit of a different look at images. And the image that we're kind of looking at today is this idea of the way and the path of spiritual transformation and spiritual change is kind of bound up in the story of so many people who interact with Christianity. And specifically, the idea of a path or a way is the way that Paul specifically kind of encountered Jesus in his own life. And so we find ourselves today in Acts chapter 22, 1 through 11, and this isn't Paul telling the story. Paul tells lots of stories in the New Testament. He wrote a good bit of it, but this one is written by Dr. Luke about Paul's experience. And so why don't we just go ahead and jump into the text. And it's a bit of a longer text today, 11 verses, so I'm not going to read all of it, but would encourage you to do so and maybe even keep reading around it as well, which sometimes I suggest for extra credit. So, brothers and esteemed fathers, Paul said, listen to me as I offer my defense. So, Paul is here, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, Paul is in Jerusalem, and he is giving a defense as to why he shouldn't be arrested, which Paul was always kind of on the outs with people because of what he preached and where he chose to preach it. And a lot of folks just didn't like what Paul was saying to be said in their communities publicly. So whenever Paul begins his speech, they hear him speaking in their own language, and the silence was even greater. And so Paul had the ability to speak in their tongue and in their language, and that made them pause and listen to Paul. So what is he going to say here? He said, well, I'm born a Jew, or I'm a Jew who was born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, and I was brought up and educated here in Jerusalem under Gamaliel, and they would have recognized that name. That rabbi was a very famous and important rabbi, and still to this day was a very important rabbi in Judaism. And so Paul, being a student of that rabbi, I mean, it's almost more important, frankly, than being a student of Einstein. It's just inexplicable how important it was to be able to be a student of someone with such greatness as Gamaliel. So as his student, I was carefully trained in our Jewish laws and customs. And so Paul is now here kind of laying a resume of sorts of his Judaism, of his past, of how he grew up. And he's saying, you may think of me in this way of being a Christian and being kind of an antagonizer for a message that maybe you don't want to hear, but maybe should at least consider. But the reality of this situation is you should not just ignore me because you think you know who I am, because you really don't know who I am and where I've come from. And if you knew who I was and where I've come from, if you knew the path that I have taken, if you knew the way, then you might reconsider what you think you know. In fact, the early Christians, they called themselves the way. And so Paul is going to talk about how he had persecuted the way in the verses that follow this one that we just read. And he's going to discuss the terrible, awful ways in which he tried to destroy the way of Jesus. But then he's going to pivot to a different kind of way, not a metaphorical way like the way of Jesus, but a very literal way, a road. So he set up his resume of his value and importance and prominence and understanding and knowledge in Judaism. And now he's going to kind of pivot to this life experience that he had on the way to Damascus around noon, where a very bright light from heaven suddenly shines down all around him. He falls to the ground and hears a voice saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" This is like Old Testament theophanies, where there is an encounter with God. Jesus, obviously, I think, is who he's having an encounter with. But Paul, at this point, doesn't understand this. So he says, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice replied, "I am Jesus, the Nazarene, the one whom you are persecuting." So this is post-resurrection. This is post-ascension. And so Paul is now having an encounter, the text of Acts 22 tells us, with this risen Christ, the one whom he is persecuting. So he's on the way, persecuting the way, and Jesus says, "No way." I probably should have put that in a title. That was pretty good. Came up with that on the spot. Anyway, the people with me saw the light, but they didn't understand the voice that was speaking to me. So it's almost as though it's in a language that only Paul could understand. So at the beginning of this, just a few sentences earlier, the people hear Paul in their own language and they understand and pay attention. And so this is kind of the same thing. There's a handle here where the same thing is now happening Paul, where Paul is hearing in a language that he understands, but nobody else around does. And so Paul says, "What do I do, Lord? What do you want?" And the Lord says, "Get up, go into Damascus, and there you will be told everything that you are to do." This is fascinating that Jesus doesn't give him immediately a plan of action as to what to do. There's this lull. There's this period where Paul perhaps needs to be either broken or settle or confirm that he's in. But now we're in a process. And the process at this point requires Paul to simply follow directions and to wait to be told everything that he is to do. And we hate waiting. We want to know the way now, right? We don't want to start moving on a path that we don't know where the destination is. So we stall. Very few of us have the ability inside of ourselves to say, "I'm going to keep moving forward," when either I don't know where the destination is, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, I don't know how long it's going to take, or even sometimes I think I know where this is going to end and I don't like it, so I'm just going to stall, or I'm going to head back in the other direction. I'm going to be Jonah. And so Paul has a decision to make here as to what he does. And the rest of the story, and you can keep reading if you want to, is Paul follows the instructions. He goes, he has this other encounter with a priest. His scales fall off his eyes, which is both a literal, I think, and metaphorical as well. And Paul sees the harm that he has been bringing to the way of Jesus. And he kind of 180 degrees reorients who he is and what his mission is and how he interacts and understands it. And things move forward from there. But he's telling this, remember the context, to a very Jewish audience who is antagonistic with both who he is now and what he thinks and how he is living out that faith and living out that call. And I think that is important because Paul at first had the crowd. They were with him when he was giving his resume of ways in which he was like them and in agreement with them, where they had common ground. But then when the crowd remembers what it has against Paul, it is that he compromises with the Gentiles. The problem isn't that he is a Gentile or that he is different. The problem is that he makes concessions for, he understands, he aligns, he compromises with in their minds, um, the enemy, those who are different, those who think differently, those who are followers of the way, followers of Jesus, seeing him as the Messiah rather than the idea that Messiah has not yet come. And so I think that this is perhaps important to us. I mean, I see this oftentimes, many times as well. So much of the negativity that I get personally online, on social media, and in context is because I am an aging, white, privileged Protestant male who oftentimes is saying things that run against the thinking and the desires and perceived needs of other white, aging Protestant men. And so because of that, it's not that they have against me who I am or how I was raised or all of these things that you can see on the outside. It really is that I think and act differently, and sometimes in ways that is against my best interest as a privileged white guy and other privileged white aging guys' interests. And it's that compromise, the way that I am making them feel and maybe working against them, that sometimes causes there to be some friction and frustration and consternation. We make so much about who we are on the outside with each other oftentimes. Even, I'm sure some people bristled when I said white, Protestant, aging, privileged, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth of the matter is that those things truly are, at the end of the day, superficial, but it's what I use them for that can be the issue, the problem, the drama. And it is this way with Paul as well. Whenever we're thinking about images of in the New Testament, part of the images in the New Testament are the images of the way, whether we're on the right way or the wrong way and headed to the way of Jesus or away from the way of Jesus. But also, I think that we can think of things that get in the way of the way. And maybe it is what's on the inside, or I mean, maybe it's what's on the outside that's getting in the way of the way, or maybe it's something deeper that's on the inside that's getting in the way. Well, that will require some personal and internal reflection. And we'll encourage you to do that today in your study guide or on your own. We'd love to hear feedback from you as to what you think and where you are and how you are filtering all of these things. And my hope for you is that wherever you are in your spiritual journey, that you are on the way to somewhere and not stalled. Well, until next time, it's good to be with you today. We'll see you then.